Well, hello everyone, and welcome to Holistic Primary Care. My name is Eric Goldman, and I'm the editor of Holistic Primary Care, and I'm thrilled you've been able to join us tonight for what promises to be a really interesting webinar. The topic tonight is mood by microbe. This seems to be the hot topic right now in integrative medicine research, particularly with regard to the microbiome, the connection between what happens in our gut, how the microbiome affects our central nervous system. I mean, there's just an explosion of research on this. And so we're going to take a nice deep dive into that. I don't know, it's fascinating work. It's kind of redefines what it means to be human, really. And we like to think that our moods and our cognitive states and all our experiences are about us and our relationships and what we watch on television and et cetera. But you know, it's turning out that maybe the bugs in our gut have a lot more to say about that than we do. And it does kind of redefine that old notion of something bugging you. So next time somebody says, yeah, you know, something's really bugging me, they may be a lot more literal than previously thought. So our speaker tonight is Dr. David Scheiderer. He's an integrative psychiatrist, and he specializes in psychoneuroimmunology. He practices down in Sarasota, Florida. And he's very well versed in all these aspects of microbiome and genetics and how the microbial world interfaces with the human world and how that affects our hormones and our neurotransmitters and all that good stuff. He received his medical degree from Ohio State University and did a behavioral medicine and psychiatry residency at the University of Virginia. And he's certified by the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology. He also holds an MBA from Everett College. So he's got the medical side and the business acumen down pat. And earlier in his career, he was a development director of a psychiatric residency program at University of Virginia in Roanoke. And so he's got a lot to say about this evening's topic. Just a few bits of housekeeping and logistics. We are going to take questions at the end of Dr. Scheiderer's talk. So if you do want to ask questions, there's a little tab in your control panel that says questions. Just click on that and it'll open a chat box, and you type in your questions to us, and we will do our best to answer as many of them as we can in the allotted time. There is a handout for tonight's talk. The slides are all available, so if you click the little tab on your control panel that says handout, you'll see there's a PDF in there. You just click on that and it will download the PDF file to your computer, so you don't have to take notes. You can just kind of follow along or just review it at another time. So before I turn things over to Dr. Scheiderer, we just have a few quick little questions for you, just to get a sense of your experience with probiotics, particularly in regard to mood and mental health issues. So here we go. So what percentage of your patients currently experience stress-related symptoms? And the answer choices are under 10%, 11 to 25%, 26 to 50%, 51 to 75%, or more than 75%. And ooh, looks like there's a lot of stress out there, folks. 44% of you are saying that it's in the 50 to 75% range, and 50% are saying that it's more than 75%. So I guess it's fair to say that we are a world under stress. Okay, next question is, do you routinely recommend probiotic supplements to help patients manage their stress? Okay, and it looks like we've got about a third saying yes and 2/3 saying no. Okay, thank you for that. And our third and final question. What are your most important criteria when selecting a probiotic for stress-related symptoms? And you can select any number of these options that apply. So specific strains, positive randomized controlled trial data, CFU count, prior experience with the product, or colleague recommendation. Okie doke. Well, it looks like about 50% are saying specific strains, 38% are looking for positive RCT data, 29% are looking at CFU counts, 54% are saying prior experience, and 21% are going on colleague recommendations. So that's our spot polls. Thank you very much for your input. It does help us to just understand where you're at with all this. And with that, let me turn things over to Dr. David Scheiderer. Okay, sure. Here we go. David, it is all yours.
Okay, let me find my slides. Do you think that would be helpful, is what you're telling me?
Yeah, you know.
It's optional. All right, people, listen up. We got a lot to go through, and I won't even know if you're making faces at me or falling asleep in your pudding. I don't know what you're going to be doing, but I'm going to go ahead and wade through a lot of slides. And I have to tell you that, Eric, thank you for that great introduction and getting us off to a good start. I ain't all that, okay? I'm just a simple country psychiatrist. I kind of back my way into all this, and I'm just trying to learn as fast as I can. I'm mostly a mainstream Western allopathic shrink, and still use a lot of hardcore medications. I don't use a lot of Thorazine unless I'm really mad at you. My tools, however, over the last 35 years have been woefully abysmal. I've had to learn new tricks. And so I started dabbling in the darker arts of holistic and integrative kinds of things, including the gut. So here's my iteration. I can think of absolutely no reason that you would pay attention, but I'm going to do it anyhow. All right, mood by microbe, dysbiosis. That's the new unifying, check this out for auspiciousness, unifying theory of mental illness and diseases of civilization, right? That's pretty bold talk. I speak for a lot of people. I consult for a lot of people. I'll speak and consult for you if you'll have me. All right. We're going to describe gastrointestinal contributions to common psychiatric conditions, nay, all of almost civilization, not limited to brain problems. How do we assess people for the possibility of a gut-brain disturbance? And then what do we do about it? That seems pretty reasonable to discuss. Moved by microbe towards a clinical transition. I remind you of what Hippocrates once said. I think it was before COVID, I'm not sure. All disease begins in the gut. I repeat that. All disease begins in the gut. My loose translation of that would be, it's all about the gut, about the gut. I would sing that to you, but I'm not very gifted at singing. And I probably won't sing unless you make me mad. Now, it's also, though, however, all about the brain. And if you don't believe me, well, I'd like you to listen to this, if I can get it to play. I don't hear the volume. All right. I don't know if you heard that, but that would be Stephen Stahl, one of our big medical educators in mainstream psychiatry, right? A lot of CME. He runs the Neuroscience Educational Institute. As an aside, not stealing his material. I'm a member of that fine organization, and I have access to many slides in his videos. And I was looking at his microbiome talk, and I'll be darned if half of it weren't slides that I had made, some of which you're going to see tonight. I first started getting into this topic in 2010. That's that little red circle there. And that's really all the articles I could find. You see how flat that is to the left. So before 2010, there just was not a lot of information about the human microbiome. I stopped looking as of about 2015. What's that, 6 years ago? And already we were seeing exponential growth, and I don't even know what's beyond exponential growth, but man, oh man, alive, woman, oh woman, alive. I'm not trying to be sexist here. Just a huge proliferation of peer-reviewed journals about this topic. It is a very hot topic. Had nothing to do with me starting out in 2010 with an interest in this, but I will say that I was right there with the rest of us in our zeal to learn more about this. Now, I try to keep up with the literature as best I can. Here is what I have discovered. Here's what I've, I guess, concluded about the literature. And I quote Josh Billings, an American humorist, who said, and I quote, "I have finally come to the conclusion that a good, reliable set of bowels is worth more to a man than any quantity of brains." That's pretty good, right? So when people say you're full of, well, SHIT, you simply look them in the eye without compunction and you say, "Thank you, sir. Thank you, madam." All right. Well, that leads me to a little bit, I guess, a deeper dive into what I think is going on. And this is data supported. I know you think I make this stuff up. You think, oh, Dave's just smoking dope again. I don't inhale, as you probably know. And it just comes to me in a vision. No, this is all data supported, all peer reviewed. I'm glad you have access to the slides because all the references are down below at the bottom of these slides. And here's what we got. Chronic degenerative conditions, diseases of civilization, they're called, including most mental disorders, are on the rise and have overtaken infection. Yes, even in this last year, still have overtaken infections as the major source of death and illness. This epidemiological transition is due, at least in part, to environmental changes that have increased the disease liability of genetic profiles that were once benign, right? So our genes aren't changing. Probably our epigenetics even are not changing that quickly, other than, well, that's probably not true, right? It's the environment's influence on ancient genes that are now conferring disease liability to those once benign profiles. Okay. This epidemiologic transition is associated with low-grade, chronic, systemic, unrelenting inflammation, metaflammation. Winter is coming. The winter that is coming is inflammation, people. All right. Now, down below, and I think this is the one I want to talk about the most. I don't know what just happened there. Okay. Multiple converging lines of evidence have shown that a primary source of this inflammation may be dysfunction of the gut-brain axis. Said system-wide inflammation causes perturbations in psychoneuroimmunological parameters, neurotransmitters, hormones, growth factors, immune reactivity. And I dare say many of that can be measured and probably ought to be measured and thereby can be addressed. Okay, that's my theory. Sticking to it. We're going to look just briefly at this kind of gut-brain connection, that the belief that, the premise that much of this metaflammation is driven by gut-brain dysfunction. So to the left, we've got my own homemade mnemonic, right, acrostic gulch, which really defines the substrate. And that gulch stands for genes, uterine environment, life experiences, particularly early life adversity, choices and habits. That's basically who we are. To the right of that, you then see triggers, and those would be modern, contemporary life slings and arrows, work-related urbanicity, poor nutrition, lack of sleep, toxins, emotional stress, hormonal imbalance, infection, pace, drugs. Throw into that, right, the threat of COVID-19, all the fear that that has generated, all the stress that that has generated. And then, of course, not to mention all of the, oh man, I don't have to tell you, right? I've never seen so many miserable, anguished individuals in my life. What is that doing to their psychoneuroimmunological status? What is it doing to their gut? Well, I have an idea, and that is we think that the combination, right? So your genes, your uterine environment. What was going on with mom when she was pregnant with you? Early life adversity, a big setup. Choices and habits currently, right? You know your slovenly ways, and then all of life's contemporary slings and arrows, including the COVID, the lockdown, all the consequences therein. That leads to decreased gut microbial diversity. There's that wheel of inflammatory misfortune right in the middle, okay? I lost my slides. I should have made them up, right? Okay, they're there. That then decreased gut microbial diversity leads to increased intestinal permeability. The intestinal hyperpermeability, we call that leaky gut in the vernacular. Then you get lipopolysaccharide translocation. What that means is everything that should just pass right on through your gut lumen to the bitter end now gets absorbed because of these gaps in your intestinal epithelial cells. That then leads to cytokine and other chemokines, other inflammatory proteins mostly, and then you get leaky brain. That's right. If your gut leaks, your brain leaks, and then that then becomes the theoretical consideration for if you're inflamed in the periphery, you're going to end up being inflamed centrally. Likewise, if your inflammation starts in the brain, it will soon spread to your body. What are the two biggest contemporary sources of inflammation currently? Well, the first one would be relationships, interpersonal strife. The other, of course, would be dietary. Don't be looking for all kinds of exotic things. It's relationships and your diet. Or as we like to say, it's either someone you met or something you ate. I'm a simple guy, but that really does explain a lot of our neuroinflammation. All that then leads to our contemporary diseases of civilization to the right. So we can, if you wanted to start to the right and say, well, why are we seeing so much cancer, heart disease, diabetes, right? GERD, depression, MS, Alzheimer's, IBD, psoriasis, arthritis, pain, obesity, asthma. Well, then you can go back and say, well, it has to do with our genes, sure, maybe 30%. But our early life experiences, our in utero environment, what we're doing currently, all life stressors, and then you start this wheel of inflammatory misfortune that starts with decreased gut microbial diversity. All right, that's the theory. We got a lot of evidence to support that. Let's blow up just that wheel of inflammatory misfortune real quick, right? And that would basically be saying decreased gut microbial diversity, which we can measure these days, right? Increased intestinal permeability. You get translocation of all kinds of nasty foreign proteins that are your immune cells, 80% of which live in your gut, do not recognize. All hands on deck, shoot first, ask questions later. All this then mounts an exuberant immune reaction. Then you got those cytokines, oxidative, nitrosative stress. I said it, then you got that increased blood-brain barrier leakiness, and off you go. Okay. Interesting. Check this article out. Blood-brain barrier associated tight junction dysfunction is a hallmark feature of major psychiatric disorders, right? So many of our psychiatric disorders, this was 2020. That was that, remember last year? I know you're trying to forget it. This was published last year. It's being, I guess many are opining that a common denominator that weaves together our seemingly disparate psychiatric disorders might be blood-brain barrier leakiness, which presumably, again, is due to intestinal barrier leakiness, the old leaky gut. Just as a reminder, dysbiosis, it could either be you have abnormalities, too much or too little of certain things, or there's just out of balance, okay? And you know this better than I do. I'm preaching to the choir here. This is a little bit older article, 2014, and I just showed you one 2020. Many of our psychiatric disorders are associated with, maybe even caused by, leaky brain. Here's one for you, dysbiosis, which is driving that whole process, we think provides a plausible clue as to the origin of systemic metabolic disorders encountered in clinical practice that may explain the epidemic of chronic diseases. What? Right? There's been a proliferation, that epidemiological transition I talked to early on. And here then would be some of the causes. and some of the consequences of this dysbiosis, right? So to the left, you see a number of things. We won't focus on all of those. In the middle, then you see where what do those things cause, I guess, farther upstream, and that would be the localized gut inflammation, systemic inflammation, that oxidative nitrosative stress, altered synthesis of neurotransmitters, right? When you're inflamed, you burn through your neurotransmitters faster and you replenish them more slowly. So the drain is wide open and the faucet is down to a drip. I wonder what effect that'll have on you. You get the then intestinal permeability, chronic infections, impaired detoxification, regulation of that stress, impaired nutrient synthesis and absorption, right? So you're not only not making your nutrients, you're not absorbing them even if you have a perfect diet. If you have dysbiosis and leaky gut, impaired enzyme activity, autoimmunity, and then over to the right, those diseases of civilization you know very well. This is just an example, okay, of some of those diseases of civilization, and by no means an exhaustive list, right? This is just I guess, a representative, illustrative example of some of them, and they pretty much cover the whole brain and body. You've got your neurodegenerative disorders. I'm particularly interested in that. All of my primary psychiatric conditions accelerate brain rot, right? They accelerate the rate at which you're going to have neurodegeneration. And I'm always looking for ways of not only treating your symptoms today, right? Reducing your misery, your suffering, optimizing functioning, but I really want to preserve your brain for all time. Now, I know there are other important target organs that we try to preserve. The brain, frankly, is in my top 2 or 3 every single time, right? So I want to preserve your brain as long as I can. Of course, cardiovascular disease, there in the middle left, intestinal disorders, that's kind of a duh. Keep in mind, however, that most of your symptoms associated with dysbiosis are what we call extra-intestinal. They're outside of the intestinal tract. All those psychiatric and mood disorders, right? Anxiety, depression, autism, bipolar, schizophrenia, you name it. The metabolic disorders, the endocrine disorders, and then, of course, pregnancy-related conditions. All right, a lot of people are thinking that the rather steep rise in the prevalence of autism is related to this whole dysbiosis, leaky gut, leaky brain, wheel of inflammatory misfortune, right? 2004, it was 1 in 166, 2018, 1 in 59. Are you kidding me? What's that all about? Leaky gut as a danger signal for autoimmune disease. Look at the rise since 1950 in some of the big players: Crohn's disease, diabetes mellitus 1, asthma, MS. What is that all about? Could it have anything to do with the gut? Well, yeah, we think so. The microbiome and Alzheimer's, that bullet point, I think the second one is the only one I'll read to you. And that basically is intestinal environmental changes can gradually destroy the ability of the brain to protect itself from toxic substances. Leaky gut-induced inflammation will eventually lead to leaky brain, which is increased permeability of the blood-brain barrier. That's actually where I got that language to begin with, was from this article. And that then may be one of those risk factors, maybe even mediators of, so risk factors for mediators of Alzheimer's disease. I love this one. You know, when I look at Dr. Dave's top 10, that's me, Tizai rather, Dr. Dave's top 10 health-related behaviors, sleep is always up there, number 1, right? The most anti-inflammatory thing you can do tonight is get 8 hours of sleep. If you don't sleep tonight, just curtail your sleep by 4 hours. You have measurable increases in high-sensitivity CRP, tumor necrosis factor alpha, other measures of systemic inflammation. You also, seriously, check this out. Wait for it, drum roll. 1 bad night of sleep, and you have measurable increases in beta amyloid plaque, right, which is pathognomonic for Alzheimer's. After a week of bad sleep, you have measurable increases in neurofibrillary phosphorylated tau proteins. Now, that's a mighty big expression for a psychiatrist this late at night. What that means is we think that bad sleep in the decade of the 30s and the 40s can predispose you to Alzheimer's, early cognitive decline. How might that be happening? Well, I don't know for sure, but we do know that sleep deprivation causes a release of pro-inflammatory chemicals, which leads to increased blood-brain barrier permeability. You're starting to see a theme here, I hope. Neuroinflammation, cognitive impairment, right? What is the gut doing that whole time? It's just really sobering stuff. This would be some of the latest news on the gut and depression. You know, depression is still the most common psychiatric illness seen globally. It's the leading cause of disability in the world. It kills you on average 10 years before your time. It's bad. It's not a hangnail. And what we're learning is that depressed patients have different gut microbiota from healthy persons. And if I'm feeling really ornery, kind of, you know, I got a little bee in my bonnet, I can give you, as a non-depressed person, a depressed person's fecal material. Yeah, don't put it past me, and then I can make you depressed. That's right. Depressive symptoms can be transmitted following fecal microbiota transplantation. Don't do that at home, seriously. Also, we know that gut microbiota disturbances can increase susceptibilities of depression to depression. We know that I can give you, a depressed person, a non-depressed person's fecal material and treat your depression effectively. That's kind of cool. We also know that many of our psychotropics exert profound influences on the composition of your gut microbiota, for better and for worse. Whenever I see one of the most prominent, most difficult symptoms for me to treat, whether it's in depression, whether it's in anxiety, whether it's in just the stress of living in the lockdown and the pandemic, whether it's bipolar, it doesn't matter. But if it's anhedonia, without joy, if you are not experiencing joy, by and large, that's a sign of inflammation, neuroinflammation, low dopamine, neuroinflammation. That then, of course, reminds us that the whole reward circuitry, those circuits, nodes, and networks that modulate cognition, reward, clarity of thought, mood, all have to do with integrity of the gut and therefore the brain barriers. Kind of cool. Now, this one we've already seen. I'm just going to circle that bottom one. You know, we got to keep in mind what effect. You guys don't do this, you gals don't do this, but my peeps do it all the time. We just hand out medicine like it's candy, and we're seeing more of this, right? Do you think we're seeing more use of antibiotics right now, given all of the fear associated with COVID? You know we are. Well, is there an effect on the gut microbiome? Well, you know for sure that there is. This data I thought was quite interesting, but just a single course of an antibiotic, especially certain of them, clindamycin, ciprofloxacin, show a severe and long-term impact on the health-associated butyrate-producing microbial community in the gut, with a corresponding decrease in the synthesis of short-chain fatty acids. Now, I don't know what any of that means, but it sounds bad, right? And what we can kind of summarize is a single course of an antibiotic can change your gut microbiota composition for up to 13 months, a single course of an antibiotic. All right, that's not something we want to see very often. All right, down below, just going to skip to that. Health-related consequences for the gut microbiome should increase the awareness of the individual risk associated with individual antibiotic use, especially in a diseased population with an already dysregulated microbiome. Who's dying of COVID, and what is their gut microbial diversity status? I think you probably know. Well, it's not like antibiotics are the only culprit. Proton pump inhibitors, you don't use them much, but I know a lot of our colleagues do, right? Anybody that has GERD, whether they got high or low acid, and you know what I'm talking about. Most GERD, in my experience, is too little acid. Don't get me started, right? But we're going to use that as proton and pump inhibitors more frequently even. And because we do that, check out the bottom bullet point on this slide. On a population level, the effects of PPIs are more prominent even than the effects of antibiotics or other commonly used drugs. So these penny-wise, pound-foolish approaches, I think possibly they are good data, though, to arm us to fight those battles, especially when I've got 1.5 of my feet firmly implanted in the mainstream world. I can't be too far out there. I like this. Antidepressants, antimicrobials are both. We're learning now that antidepressants, and you know what they are, right? And I don't want to go to battle without them, but I sure want to be more judicious in their use and understand what I might be doing to people. But long-term use, particularly of the serotonin dominant reuptake inhibitors, via their effect on the gut microbiota composition, actually end up increasing inflammation going forward and cause a phenomenon called tardive dysphoria. I think you probably are hearing that for the first time. Late onset miserableness, tardive dysphoria, and we're thinking that that is most likely due to an effect of chronic, probably high dose administration of serotonin dominant reuptake inhibitors on the gut microbiome. We know that psychostimulants, even at therapeutic doses, dysregulate the blood-brain barrier through alterations in tight junction complexes or through oxidative stress and neuroinflammation. What is that? I mean, let's think about it. A lot of my people diagnosed with ADHD have all kinds of neuroinflammation. I mean, think about giving them a bunch of sugar, which increases your systemic inflammation immediately, and then off go these behavioral excesses. Mightn't that be due to some inflammation? Well, let's give them all a psychostimulant and see what happens. Again, that's another penny-wise, pound-foolish approach in my estimation. Not saying don't use these agents, not saying I don't use these agents. I'm just saying, hey, holy topo gijo, Batman, be careful about that. Drugs of abuse and blood-brain barrier dysfunction, of course, that's just kind of self-evident. I'm not going to spend any time on that. This will surprise some of you, I suspect. You know, I've always been plagued with the weight gain potential for many of my psychotropics, particularly antipsychotics, and including some of my best atypical antipsychotics. Again, I do not want to go to war against some of these major mental illnesses without these things, but by golly, they sure are limited in terms of their efficacy and their tolerability. But this was, I think, an eye-opener for me, and that is the weight gain that you see with two of our old standards, risperidone, Risperdal, olanzapine, Zyprexa. The weight gain associated with them is, you know, temporally coincides with altered gut microbial diversity. Duh. All right. So might we use strategies to attend to that phenomenon to help mitigate weight gain in these agents? No data yet, but it's a compelling thought. All right. Well, that was kind of having to do with iatrogenic approaches to, or I guess contributions rather, to this whole wheel of inflammatory misfortune. Remember, I mentioned as part of my gulch early on, genes, which I can't really change. Maybe they're epigenetics, uterine environment. I want to know what's going on with mom. What was her diet like? What was her thyroid status? Did she get steroids? Did she get antibiotics? You ask those questions better than I do. But then there's that life experiences, particularly early life adversity. And what we know, and this was an amazing study, 32-year prospective study. Think about that. I mean, who in the world can do those? Certainly not a United States study. But this is something we kind of think we know, and that is the number of adverse childhood experiences, and they don't have to be particularly horrific, and then your future risk for depression, elevations of high sensitivity CRP, clustering of metabolic risk factors, and then more than one disease, right? So multi-system organ involvement. And what it finds out, or what we found out from this study, is as the number of early life adverse events goes up, so too then directly does your risk for inflammation, certain types of depression, clustering of metabolic risk markers, and then disease risk. It's not going to surprise you. That does surprise some of my mainstream colleagues. To sum up what we think is going on with early life adversity, negative, I'm going to read this one to you just because, well, it's one of those slides I made up. with data supported. All right, don't be simmered down. Negative in utero and early life experiences alter initial gut colonization, which predisposes an individual to stress-induced inflammation later in life by establishing a hyperactive HPA axis set point. So your stress point for all time is determined in large measure by what happens to you in utero and in early life. Increasing intestinal permeability, I know how many times am I going to say that. Decreasing mucosal immune tolerance by shifting undifferentiated T helper cells, Th0, and from Tregs to Th1 or Th2, right? Innate versus humoral immune activity, and then influencing epigenetic regulation, right? For example, if you inherit the MTHFR, the methylene tetrahydrofolate reductase single nucleotide polymorphism. So if you would get that and you had a good early life, it turns out to be somewhat protective against depression. What? But if you have that same genetic mutation and have a bad early life, then it actually increases your risk for depression, right? So there's that a great example of epigenetics. And the genes by themselves do not tell the whole story, but rather were they turned on or silenced early in life. But and then the last bullet point I do particularly like, in essence, early life experiences through modification of the gut ecology magnify stressors, amplify the stress response, and inhibit corrective homeostatic mechanisms resulting in chronic sustained inflammation, right? There's that meta-inflammation. Okay, cool. Not so cool. I ask everybody when they first come in, I'm a shrink now, and they look at me askance. That's a word, askance. When I say, well, what was going on with mom when she was pregnant with you? Were you a C-section or vaginal delivery? Were you breastfed or bottle fed? Well, what am I after there, right? What am I looking for there? It turns out that the bugs that initially colonize your gut, right, determine your HPA axis set point for all time, like we just discussed in that previous slide, but that's determined by your mom's vaginal flora, right? So those are the first bugs you are exposed to, or mom's vaginal flora. Second would be the skin and the milk and all the holding, and I make up my own news, by the way. You know, right? When a child is deprived of all of that, it's starting to set them up for pro-inflammatory motif going forward, and we've talked about what that looks like. All right, clinical considerations. This I'm just showing you because I made this slide and it took a lot of work, all right? And I don't care if you look, I mean, I'm kind of proud of this one. All right, this is the paracellular transport, right? That basically this is the leaky gut story. So these are your epithelial cells. There's your tight junction. Down below, there's a blow up of that tight junction with the claudins, the occludin, you know, the blah, 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 right? Your zonulin occludins. Okay. So when that is intact, not much gets through there, not much at all. In fact, we do that mannitol lactulose test primitive, but we used to use that to determine whether or not that tight junction had come unraveled, the loosening of association, so to speak. We won't talk about the transcellular pathway today other than for some oohing and awing. I can't hear you, but I'm just assuming somebody's saying, dang, wow, that's really good. But here then would be what we need to focus on a little bit. So that tight junction disassembly results in unremitting activation via leaky gut. So merrily we roll along the gut lumen to the top of with those little funky fibrillary things. And it just rolls on through, right? These big old gnarly genetically modified, you know, protein fragments from, you know, what kind of foods now can get through that leak. Normally they just pass on by. And remember, I said 80% of your immune cells live in your gut, and they are just waiting for something to do, and they're not particularly sophisticated. So if there is a fragment, right, it's all pattern recognition, and if they don't recognize this after millions of years of refinement, then look out, they're going to react. And then that is what turns somebody who might have handled gluten fine for a while, dairy fine for a while, other nasty, gnarly dietary antigens fine for a while. Now they do not, right? Because those immune cells are amped and now you have leaks in your epithelial cells. Off you go. The next slide is really a blow up of what bad things can happen. You're going to get that translocation of microbial lipopolysaccharide. That's from infectious agents, just cell walls, protein snippets from cell walls of bugs, okay, or food antigens, and then off you go. You're going to get it's just awful stuff. You're going to get Old Testament ravage. You're going to get dogs and cats living together. You're going to get mass hysteria, human sacrifices. Not maybe that bad, but you start to see where this can lead either to autoimmune illness or that kind of local systemic pro-inflammatory motif we talked about before. That then leads to everything we've already talked about, right? So that leaky gut, and then that exuberant immune reactivity is going to lead to your neurotransmitter transmission disorder, upper left, and then we're going to go clockwise, immune system dysfunction and GI diseases. You're going to have respiratory illnesses. You're going to have inflammatory liver diseases, chronic kidney diseases, autoimmune arthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, loss of muscle mass and function, obesity, metabolic disorder, not to mention all your psychiatric and neurodegenerative disorders. Here's then what we think is really going on at a more of a molecular level, okay? So up to the left, you got the leaky gut, and then that's kind of in relationship to the genes, my Gulch mnemonic. To the bottom center, you've got the wheel of inflammatory misfortune, that metaflammation. And what we know about this chronic smoldering inflammation, it decreases your zinc levels. Do you need zinc right now? Of course you do. It decreases your omega-3s. It decreases neurogenesis, so you don't make new brain cells, you don't repair damaged brain cells. Via a number of different pathways, it leads to decreases in norepinephrine, decreases in dopamine, decreases in serotonin. Do you see any problems with any of that, right? So this smoldering metaflammation, decrease in your big three neurotransmitters, norepinephrine, dopamine, serotonin, decrease in omega-3s, decrease in zinc, decrease in neurogenesis, all that's bad. And at the same time, via upregulation of your favorite and mine, indole 2,3-dioxygenase, right? You're going to get an increase in tricats, whether it be tryptophan, catabolites, toxic to your brain, increases in glutamate in the wrong places, in the wrong amounts, especially just kind of at baseline, then you're going to get more neurotoxicity. In addition, you're not going to be as efficient at getting rid of these toxic elements, right? Because you have decreased EAAT, excitatory amino acid transporter, increase in neurodegeneration, right? So you have an increase in the damage and death of cells, decrease in the ability to repair and make new ones, right? You have decreased ability to resuscitate and rebuild those neurotransmitter supplies. And then down below the bottom right, you have that cortisol steal, and that just has to do with when your system is this revved. You know, all of your hormones come from cholesterol, and we'll talk about that in a different lecture. But yeah, and if your adrenals are that stressed and you just don't have a lot of substrate, everything goes towards cortisol and supporting the adrenals because you're constantly in fight or flight. Look around. And that leaves nothing then for the anabolic steroid cascade. You know, when you're in fight or flight, you're not really thinking, be honest now, about eating or fornicating or procreating or building bone and muscle. You're just thinking about surviving. So all of that gets shunted over towards survival mode. All right, that's what happens, people. You've heard it. All right, so this is just kind of my approach, right? And I take this into consideration when I'm, you know, seeing patients of all stripes, sizes, ages, diagnoses, and when I'm using meds or not. But the first thing I tend to do is seal and heal a leaky gut, and presumably that'll help down the road, upstream, sealing and healing your leaky brain. And then I'm going to right-size inflammation. I'm not going to get rid of inflammation. We need that to fight infections and cancer. But I'll tell you what, I mean, it's a fine line. Do I want to increase your immune reactivity to keep you from getting COVID, or do I want to tone that down so you don't die when you're inevitably exposed to it, right? What do you, I mean, You tell me. I don't know. And then I'm going to resuscitate those tired adrenals, right? I see more low cortisol states than high cortisol states. I see more low cortisol depression than I see high cortisol depression. Low cortisol in psychiatry equals atypical depression, immunometabolic depression, bipolar depression. A lot of my disease states have low cortisol. So I'm going to check those adrenals, see what the cortisol is doing, support neurotransmitters and hormones. That is not going to be medication, right? None of my medications increases your supply of neurotransmitters. I'm going to have to do it via lifestyle modification, supplementation, nutraceuticals, and I'll share with you later how I think about such things. Eliminate toxins always. I seal and heal the leaky gut before I mobilize toxins so you're not just recirculating them. And then manage stress. Are you kidding me? We really got to help people manage stressors. Stress, of course, is your body's and brain's and spirit's response to the stressor. We got to help people with all of that. And then in my top 10 tips, we're not going to go over there. We all have our top 10, although I just listened to a guy from Harvard, probably out of time, but he gave me this cute little story. These are his 5 top tips for longevity. And so he told it in story form. He said, on a bright sunny day, take a walk to the corner coffee shop. Don't go nuts before you go meditate. Those are his 5. Walk outdoors, get your vitamin D naturally. Coffee, coffee, coffee. He likes his polyphenols. And then he likes a handful of nuts a day. And then he likes to meditate. Those were his 5 favorite. And they're not too far off from what my top 10 are. These are some other lifestyle interventions that have good data. All right, so the dark blue would be strong. To the left, you got strongly pro-inflammatory. To the right, you have anti-inflammatory. I mean, you know what they are, right? So in terms of what is their strong data to indicate it's going to cause inflammation, inactivity, obesity, excessive energy intake, smoking, sleep deprivation, stress, anxiety, depression, never heard that. Certain dietary fats to the right, things that might mitigate lower inflammation, right size inflammation, exercise, weight loss, restricted energy intake, smoking cessation, fish oils, fruits, vegetables, nuts. There's the nuts. How about that? In the darker gray would be things for which there's moderate evidence. I'll let you peruse that at your leisure. Why you would, I do not know, although this is a good slide. And then in the lighter kind of blue-gray would be limited evidence. There's some anecdotal stuff. This article, 08, I was just talking to one of my colleagues down in Punta Gorda, Florida today about this very article, primary care colleague. And this was from the cardiovascular literature. And it's dietary strategies for improving inflammation and postprandial dysmetabolism. And what we have here is postprandial dysmetabolism, all right? And you've heard me say it before. That just means never let your blood sugar spike, okay? And even, frighteningly low levels of postprandial blood sugar levels, your risk for death increase linearly. So this article looked at that, and it basically gave us some dietary wisdom, which I try to promulgate every chance I get. My kids even know it by heart. First is never eat a carbohydrate by itself. Never eat a carbohydrate first. If you're going to eat a meal, eat the fat and the protein first, because that blunts your postprandial rise in blood sugar and triglycerides. Other things you can add to your diet: lean protein, vinegar. I put vinegar on everything. Fish oil, tea, cinnamon, restricted calories, weight loss, exercise, low to moderate alcohol use, right? So there's just some things you can do rather than just deprive yourselves from a dietary standpoint. Very simple, really. A lot of things. You guys all have your own kind of hacks. These would be factors proposed to support the gut barrier. You got dietetic, you've got probiotics, you've got some others. You know what they are. Just a quick shout out to glutamine. I use a lot of glutamine, which helps maintain intestinal tissue integrity. It also helps you build glutamate and GABA. I don't usually overshoot. I've got a lot of people that have too much glutamate, not enough GABA. You got enough B6, you just keep driving that equilibrium over to GABA. but I do like to use a lot of glutamine, mostly for, again, sealing, healing that leaky gut. A lot of good data on that. The inflammatory microbiome, this is an older article again, but it talks about things we know to be good for us to ingest: fiber, omega-3s, bifidobacteria, polyphenols, dietary antioxidants. But cocoa, coffee, green tea, blueberries, curcumin, they all have one thing in common, and that is they support the establishment of a healthy microbiome. Who knew, right? Fish oil, one of the reasons it is beneficial is because it also exerts a positive effect on your gut, presumably my gut microbiome. This would be my own product, the, of course, blood-brain barrier Bondo. Not a real product, and I'm sure the Bondo people will come after me one day for using their likeness. But this has to do with the NRF2 pathway activators, right? NRF2 is known for its ability to regulate the expression of a series of enzymes with antioxidative, pro-survival, detoxification effects. And there's some things you can do, right, from a natural dietary perspective to help tidy up that blood-brain barrier leakiness. That's kind of cool, right? And this would be broccoli, cabbage, your cruciferous vegetables, also good for estrogen metabolism, your curcumin, your green tea, your garlic, your resveratrol, lycopene, red pepper, coffee, cinnamon, some of the same things, right, that lower blood sugar spikes also help, interestingly enough, upregulate NRF2 pathway and also serve as that blood-brain barrier Bondo. Kind of interesting. The green is what you need to emphasize or look at here. Looks like melatonin, statins, probiotics, especially those containing certain bifidobacteria, lactobacillus species and strains. Okay, N-acetylcysteine, prebiotics containing fructo-oligosaccharides and galacto-oligosaccharides. Fun to say, I don't know again what that means. Those are non-digestible starches that feed our good gut bugs. It's pretty simple. Those things have been shown, right, to, I guess, improve intestinal membrane viability as well as blood-brain barrier viability. This is going to get into then some of the specific data we have. This is mostly for your future reference. There's a lot of data in humanoids using probiotics and prebiotics in various disease states, okay? And here's a this is 2018 now, one of the recent greatest novelties in the field of neurodegenerative diseases is the chance to prevent or slow down Alzheimer's progression with agents such as probiotics and prebiotics acting outside of the central nervous system, at least initially, right? It's all about the gut, about the brain. I don't know if you got to hear that video. So this is just some of those data. Now you'll notice in these that there are species but no strains. And what I have recently learned from my new friends that know a lot more than I do in the business is that it's not, you can't just focus on these species, but you got to know specific strains because they don't all look and act and probably taste alike. But we have data with currently different foods, different probiotic strains. These would be probiotics in mood and anxiety disorders. There in the middle, we're starting to see some strains introduced, not just the species. You'll see that there is a common cast of species characters at least. And now really we're just trying to look for those synergies, those different strains to make it more customizable and more disease state specific, okay? Not just pathophysiologic specific. This was an interesting study for me as a shrink. And this was patients were hospitalized for mania, right? And upon discharge, they were randomized in a double-blinded fashion to receive 24 weeks of either adjunctive probiotics, Lactobacillus rhamnosus GG and Bifidobacterium animalis B12, or adjunctive placebo. So they basically were discharged on whatever it is that stabilized them, and half of them got that plus placebo. The other half got that plus this combination of probiotic, followed for 24 weeks. Primary outcome measure was there any difference in rehospitalization risk? Boy, that's a huge outcome measure. And it turns out that, yes, indeed, the people that were randomized to receive usual care plus the probiotic were to a statistically significant degree less likely to get rehospitalized. And if they did get rehospitalized, they weren't in the hospital as long. And that effect was particularly pronounced in people that had identifiable inflammation, right? So those that had high levels of inflammation, even more so than the average manic bear, were more likely to benefit from the use of adjunctive probiotic. How clever is that? Who thinks of these things? Ought I then, as a shrink, be discharging all my bipolars on their whatever, their atypical antipsychotic and the probiotic? It's compelling, right? Really compelling. Do I do that anyhow? Well, yeah, I do. I put a lot of people on probiotics. All right, especially if they have inflammation. Okay, probiotics and disease. So this is different strains. Change that species, no strain information here, but it gives you an idea of where this is being studied, right? So probiotics in ADHD, age-related cognitive decline, autism, depression. All right, enough said. Here's a more, I think, recent interesting study looking at normal subjects now. And can you use a probiotic, right? Which I guess goes, you swallow it and it does something in your gut. Does it change, as measured by functional MRI, the brain interconnectivity? Now, this is important to me because I know that in most of my disease states, you've got an increased signal from the deep limbic structures, right? That ventral striatum, the dopamine storms, the oh my God, the mania, the delusions, hallucinations, agitation, irritability, reactivity, weeping and a wailing, doom, despair, and agony on me, take me, Lord, to be better off dead, right? That high anxiety, you don't see any of that, I know, but of course we do every single day. So that's the ventral striatum. At the same time, you got the brain fog, the lethargy, the no joy in mudville. That's the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the rest of the prefrontal cortex. So not only is one really hot cognition, the other's really cold, but they don't connect. It would be interesting if you could kind of tone this down, increase this, and make them connect better. Could you hope that a probiotic could do that? Well, this study is starting to show, at least in normal individuals, that it increases connectivity, right? So now that's interesting. Won't get into the fanciness of it, but functional connectivity changes were observed in the default mode network, salience network, which would basically be you over-assign a survival value to just random everyday things coming in, right? And you know what I mean, right? So if everything that comes in right now, I'm saying, oh my gosh, this could kill me. Oh my gosh, this could kill me. Oh my gosh, this could kill me, right? There's a disconnect there. And then middle and superior frontal gyrus network. We won't get into all that. That's over all of our heads. But what basically this showed us was vast literature on resting state functional MRI that efficient behavior involves the coordination of these circuits, nodes, and networks, right? Not just the ventral striatum and the prefrontal cortex, but that circuit, and then the networks that incorporate that and other circuits, right? And when that's offline, it's actually kind of got a fun name, prefrontostriatal disconnectivity. Could it be? I mean, it's too early to say. But man, if I get increased functional connectivity by using a probiotic, that's a very attractive thing to ponder. Okay, this would be probiotics drive gut microbiome triggering emotional brain signatures. This is the first study reporting a distinct influence of probiotic administration at a behavioral, neuro, and microbiome level. Now, what's important about this study, well, this is all, very cutting edge stuff. This was, again, 2018. But what's important about this kind of study is, okay, so I can change your gut microbiome. So what? Tell me how that helps, right? But this would be temporally coinciding with that, right? I see neuroimaging as well as behavioral endophenotype changes. And that's something we just don't get every day. And I don't get that with all my medications for that matter. All right, this is an interesting article, the development of high quality multi-species probiotic formulations. And really what this reminds us is we got to look not only at, right, the species, but also the strains, because sometimes you might have a couple of strains within the same species that work against each other. You also want to make sure that all the strains you have in a multi-species, multi-strain probiotic work and play well together. You also want to make sure that it's going to address the issue you want it to address. Okay, so this is, don't get too bogged down. This is actually a probiotic I take every day, starting to use it more with my peeps, an Omni-Biotic product. Don't get too bogged down with the product. What I want you to look at is how I kind of think about the difference between certain products, including probiotics and others, and then food and drinks, okay? Because you hear, well, why can't I just take a fortified yogurt or something like that, a yogurt drink? Well, the data is just not there. So what I look at would be these things on the left, right? So I want to see the human strain, probiotics specified to the strain level, right? Laboratory tested, yes. Indication focused formulations. Now that's attractive to me. I don't want it to just lower your CRP. I want it to help lower your CRP and thereby help with this set of symptoms. I want it to be synergistic. I want these strains to work together. Want them to be studied in vitro, in vivo. I want some clinical trials in humanoids. I want them naturally to be free of contaminants. And then on down, I want to make sure that they survive to, you know, until they get to the point where I need them. And then I don't want them to be refrigerated. I want to have a nice long shelf life, and I don't want it to have to refrigerate it for ease of use and compliance reasons. And so not everything is going to stack up, right? So this one product, as measured by this yardstick, does pretty well. Most probiotics don't do it. Some do for others, and then most foods don't even come close. So again, don't worry about so much this product as much as how I kind of decide what types of products to offer my patients. Okay. This is that product. It was featured in some of the studies I showed you earlier. These are the strains, okay, that were used. It's marketed here in the United States as Omni-Biotic Stress Release. I first knew it as Omni-Biotic Stress Repair. And yeah, I mean, I guess I'm a poster child. I do take it every day. I like it because you just dissolve it in water and you just you let it sit for a minute and you stir it again, and then you take it, you wash it down. I take it on an empty stomach. Okay, that's it. This company has some pretty good research. I'm pretty jazzed. I have actually designed my own probiotics in the past. I've used a lot of different companies. I still do use a lot of companies, but I'm moving in the direction of I need certain types of research that I just don't get with all of my products. And I'm going to quit right there because I've probably taken more than enough time. All right. So with that in mind, people, let me get a drink of water as far as you know, and see if there are any questions. Now, Eric, if I remember from what you told me earlier, you're going to kind of spoon feed me the easy ones, okay?
Yeah, I'll spoon feed you only easy ones, and if they're funny, they're going to come to the top of the heap too, because your talk was funny, and that's rare in medicine these days.
You're kind. I hope it was also informative, but thank you for saying that.
Yeah, it was informative too, absolutely. That goes without saying. Yeah, I just also want to take a quick moment to thank Omni-Biotic for sponsoring this program this evening. They are doing some great work. It's a relatively new entry into the probiotics field here in the US, but they've got a long track record in Europe and some really cool stuff. They are offering free samples to clinicians who listen to this program. So if you're interested in checking out the Omni-Biotic products, you can go to omnibioticlife.com. That's omnibioticlife.com/samples. And you'll be able to obtain the products and check them out and see if they pass muster for your patients. So yeah, let's take a few questions. Cindy is asking, she notices that some colleagues and patients who are extremely dedicated to a high meat diet, such as the paleo, seem to become increasingly angry, aggressive, and negative. Could this be due to gradual adverse effects of the high meat, high fat on their gut microbiome? Interesting question.
Yes, it's a great question. Well, are they eating these? I mean, are they eating these like raw? Are they cooked? I mean, how are they eating them? Are they tracking them down and hunting them and killing them and roasting them there in the backyard, or are they buying them at the store? You know, Michael Pollan, one of my favorite authors about food, says we are not only what we eat, but what we eat eats. So I want to know what my meat is eating, because that's going to determine its value. For example, a grass-fed cow gives you more omega-3s than a farm-raised salmon. Okay, so there are lots of considerations there. Now, my own dietary simple, I guess, philosophy is I already shared one with you, never let your blood sugar spike, because that's very pro-inflammatory, negative effect on your gut microbiome. And then there's that wheel of inflammatory misfortune. Wherever you start, it leads to the other. The other would be there's certain big old bad gnarly proteins that we just are not used to seeing. And one of those is cow. The other is probably genetically modified gluten. Now, many of us can handle that. Many of us can't. Some of us can handle it certain times, but not when we're inflamed. So some of the things I recommend right off the bat is don't eat a lot of red meat. And I think there's good data there. And don't eat a lot of gluten. How do you do paleo with eating red meat? Well, then I tend to, for myself and others, recommend simple protein structures in my meat. And so that's pork, that's fish, that's turkey. Now you got to get clean pork because it holds on to pesticides and it holds on to antibiotics because of its fat content. But it really has to do, I think, with the complexity of the protein that's going to then drive the inflammation, that's going to then result in the decreased gut microbial diversity, and off you go to the races. I think the paleo thereby can be somewhat inflammatory for many of us. Yeah, so it's going to be a couple of considerations, but I like the paleo. I like keto. I think a case could be made for that. I just really minimize cow. You know, sheep's pretty good as well. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. I want to say about 3 or 4 years ago, that esteemed medical journal, National Geographic, did a very interesting story where they looked at actual paleo diets among people who still live pretty much a hunter-gatherer life, you know, out in other parts of the world. And suffice to say that, you know, prime rib and wild-caught salmon were not in the picture. You know, they actually like took photographs of what people living close to the land eat in a day, and there's a lot of insects and a lot of tubers and grubs and, you know, like things that they can, you know, dig out of the ground. But like, you know, so
Yeah.
our idea, like this sort of like post-industrial American industrial version of the paleo diet is a radically different thing from what actual hunter-gatherers would.
Such a good point, Eric. Such a good point. Including you walked 100 miles a day. You had interval training because occasionally, if you saw a rabbit, you'd run after it to catch it, and when you saw the saber-toothed tiger, you'd run like hell to escape it. So you're walking and you're getting the interval training and you're pulling and you're tugging. You get your isometrics, you're gardening, not really, but you know and then you're outdoors. You're getting your natural vitamin D and you're probably sleeping, right? Because you're exhausted, and when the sun goes down, there's nothing else to do but tell stories, fornicate, or sleep. There wasn't any TV back then, and then you wake up when the sun comes up. So we were much more. Paleo is much more than just eating a lot of red meat. You know, so to your point, that's excellent. Very good.
Well, it's a great question. Thank you, Cindy. Okay, Deborah is asking if you've actually had any success in turning around Alzheimer's disease patients.
Wow. No, I wouldn't say I've had success in turning it around. I mean, I think I've had success in forestalling it, right? Because I do a lot of brain protection preaching. And I think I've probably had quite a few instances of preventing conversion from mild cognitive impairment to, you know, Alzheimer's. And then I think I've probably stabilized it. You know, Del Bredson, how do you say his name? I'm dyslexic. It's Bredson or Bredson. I don't know. Thank you, from the old UCLA guy. And I like this stuff, but I remember his very first article, and I loved it. You know, when he talked about the reversal of cognitive impairment and Alzheimer's was the name of the article long before he wrote his book. And I thought, well, now that's interesting. A patient of mine sent that to me. And he had a nice table in there about all the kinds of things you ought to be doing. Now his N was very small, and he's since elaborated on that. But it is upon some of that early work that I've based a lot of my supplements. And so you betcha, by golly. Now, have I reversed it? I would say probably not. The only data I've seen that's pretty compelling would be severe caloric restriction. Okay, and if you look at that one chart I showed you, the dark blue, the gray, and then the lighter blue gray. The dark blue pro-inflammatory was all these energy dense foods that we eat, a Whopper probably, or a big Whopper. I forget what they were called, but you get the picture. And then over to the right where you saw the anti-inflammatory, it was caloric restriction, right? To decrease the concentration of it. And so I think that's the best way to do it. I just don't have any patients willing to do that. But I do use a lot of the same strategies, all of which really, if you look at them carefully, are seal and heal a leaky gut and right size inflammation. That's really, I don't want to be too simplistic, but that's where it really all starts for me.
Do probiotics figure strongly in Bredeson's protocols?
Well, they're in the original. Yeah, they are. He has probiotics in there. He has fish oil in there. He has intermittent fasting in there. He has get your 8 hours of sleep in there. He has then certain other supplements. Certainly the D3. He likes N-acetylcysteine. A lot of the very things that I use, all of which have data, interestingly enough, in right sizing inflammation, and all of which have data in that kind of leaky gut, leaky brain. Many of which also have positive effects on the gut microbiome.
Great. Okay, Jean is asking, do you like and use the spore-based probiotics?
Yes, sometimes I do. I don't know that I'm smart enough to tell you why that is better than the others. Okay, and yeah, so I'm just going to cry uncle, and if you want to jump back in and tell me what you like about them. But I audition a number of different products. Have I used enough of that technology to be able to tell you? Probably not, because I'm doing so many things at once, and that's one of the hazards of my approach. Is I just want you better, right? I want you to feel better. I want you to function better. I want you to pursue happiness more effectively. I want to stave off, the winter that's coming for all of us, which is neurodegenerative illness. So I do so many things at once, and it seems to help. But it's hard for me to know what any one intervention is doing. That's why I'm a clinician, not a researcher. But no, I would welcome any education on the spores that I can.
Therein is the big challenge in integrative or holistic medicine in general. How do you tease out the one thing that's doing it when it may not be one thing that's doing it?
Yeah, boy, that's and you know what? I guess I just have to suspend my need to know that in order to help my people.
Okay, Rachel is asking, what are your feelings on liver and gallbladder cleanses, or how about fasting to cleanse the gut? Basically, gut cleansing. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think there are any number of good ways that can be done. There are a lot of good protocols out there. I usually borrow someone else's. I'm kind of like to reset things once in a while, and then I use just a lot of common everyday detoxification measures, right? And so that's where I use a lot of my silymarin and my kind of a lot of N-acetylcysteine. Plus minus glutathione. I use more N-acetylcysteine just because it's got more data for the brain applications, not just the liver detoxification. And of course, we think that the NAC is converted to glutathione, of course, in the liver, but I tend to use more NAC. So yes, I'm a fan of, although I don't prescribe a lot of them. Okay, and another area I think I probably could learn more. I'm more of a common everyday. What do I want to say? Detoxifier. Because I'll tell you, the poor liver, oh my gosh, especially this day and age with everything that we're exposed to, all the stress we're under, and then all the stuff we put in our bodies.
And all the extracurricular drinking we're all doing, right?
Yeah, well, I will drink to that after class, of course. But Yeah, I mean, that's although, I can't cite the reference now, but this had to do another one of those longevity huge studies, meta-analysis, and they try to call out well, what is it that people that live a long time, what are they doing, right? Well, that's what happens to just say, drink more wine and eat more cheese. Well, okay. I'm not recommending that yet, but it did warm the cockles of my heart.
It used to help if you live on an island too, right? Aren't a lot of those
Well,
places?
yeah. Well, that's that blue zone. That was also a National Geographic study where they looked at what were some of those common denominators. There's a great book out by, I think, George Valence, his name, an old Harvard psychiatrist. He's written a lot of good stuff, and he wrote Aging Well, and he basically found, maintain your high school body weight if you can. Don't smoke, right? If you ever did smoke, stop now. Have a good marriage, make new friends, but keep the old ones. It was really pretty simple advice, nothing too extravagant. And he said, yeah, you can enjoy a glass of wine here and there or drink here and there. The data's always up and down on that. I'm not going to profess to be an expert on that.
Yeah, right, and it certainly doesn't explain the southern Mediterranean where people, drink in copious amounts, smoke like crazy, shoot shotguns in the air, and somehow all managed to live to be 104. I don't know. So,
yeah, well, and you'd have to wonder what that is. My guess is a lot of walking and a lot of talking, right? A lot of socialization.
fresh mountain air too. Okay, here's a good question. If one had stressors and lack of sleep, et cetera, in their 30s and 40s, sounds like we're talking about going to medical school or something, and then get on track for gut health later in life in the 60s, can the adverse outcomes be mitigated or reversed?
I sure believe so. I sure hope the heck fire so, okay? Because otherwise we're all screwed. In the vernacular, we're all compromised. Yes, I absolutely believe that we can right the ship. Now, I was plagued with autoimmune illness that got triggered when I was 5 years old, when I had strep throat and chicken pox and scarlet fever and was hallucinating. And then I had autoimmune illness the rest of my life. Will I ever recover from that? Probably not. But can I change my trajectory? I believe that I can, and that's one of the things I got interested in, was because these approaches that we employ, we backwards are us. They apply to me and my kids and my loved ones, not just my patients, and that's very attractive. But yes, I absolutely think so. I can't change your genes. I can't change what happened to you in utero. I cannot change, your early life experiences, including early life adversity. But I can change your current choices and habits, and in so doing, I think, change your health and longevity and happiness trajectory. If I didn't believe that, I would just retire.
Okay, Diane's got a sort of a practical clinical question. How long should you take probiotics, and should you change the lineup occasionally?
Yeah, I mean, I come from an old farming family. We did crop rotation. I do believe in bug rotation. I don't know that there's data to support that. I don't know the answer to how long do you take them. I take mine faithfully, religiously, and have for years. I do swap out the strains, the preparations, depending on what the newest data is. But then again, I'm chock full of inflammation. And the reason I take probiotics mostly is to right size inflammation, is to tell the 80% of my immune cells that reside in my gut to not react, right? And that's that theory, that loss of old friends, the hygiene theory, right? What are we doing to our kids in this current overly hygienic environment we live in? We're sanitizing everything. Well, what's that going to do to their gut microbiome and their risk for degenerative diseases going forward? No, oh my gosh, don't get me started on that. But I will say that part of the reason I take probiotics is because my ancient immune cells will recognize these old friends, and basically it's all's quiet on the Western Front and not react, okay? And I think that's why you see some of the same recurring species. Now we're seeing strains because Well, we need the data in humans to figure it out more precisely. But it's to right-size inflammation, and I don't see my inflammatory motif ever going away. So I'll continue to take my fish oil. I'll continue to try to get my 8 hours of sleep. I'll continue to try to get some exercise. I've taken up pickleball. You'll be glad to. I don't have much of a backhand, but man, come back in a year. I'll tell you, I'm going to have game. So I'm trying to do all the right things, but I will say probiotics is one of those things I don't miss very often. Yeah.
So let's take a typical. I loved your formulation earlier about late onset miserableness.
Yeah. There you
Yeah.
go.
So let's say you've got a patient like this, late onset miserableness, and you're trying to shift them to a lifestyle-based, probiotic-based approach. Do you have like a sort of general formula, sort of like a protocol that you use? I mean, how do you do that? How do you treat those patients?
Wow. I have some recurring themes. I wouldn't say I have a protocol. I don't really care for a one size fits all. I think that's if someone comes into mainstream medicine, mainstream primary care, mainstream psychiatry, mainstream psychiatry meeting criteria for depression, they're all going to get one size fits all in SSRI. Well, we know that maybe at best helps a sixth to a third of our patients. And so I'm going to say, well, why, what are the psychoneuroimmunological perturbations driving your tardive dysphoria, your late onset miserableness? Now, if I had to guess, sometimes I do, I would guess, based on what we know, if you support serotonin, for example, unilaterally for any length of time, you get a compensatory decrease in norepinephrine and dopamine. That then leads to increase in inflammation, and that's then what leads to your anhedonia. I'm not depressed, I'm not anxious, I'm flat, right? I got nothing in the tank. I'm a zombie. I'm gaining weight. I'm not having orgasms. I don't even care. Pass the bonbons, right? And that's too much serotonin for too long. Now I can make some assumptions and say, hey, you need some dopamine norepinephrine. I'll give you some coke or meth. That's off label, people, right? But more than likely, I'm going to try to support by hook or by crook other neurotransmitters that haven't been supported. And then I'm also going to probably opine that this is going to be someone who has inflammation. I know that SSRIs, for example, over time increase inflammation. So I'm going to take care of that. Now, I do believe in measuring in the blood systemic markers of inflammation. We don't have great ones, but CRP, actually there's data in psychiatry. I've used the high sensitivity CRP to stratify not only supplements, but also medications. For example, if you are depressed and have an elevated CRP, you're not going to do well on Lexapro. You're not going to do well on certain other serotonin agents. You're going to do better on norepinephrine agents, for example. And likewise, I'll use different biomarkers. Salivary cortisol is one. I'm one of those kind of quacks that does urinary neurotransmitters as well. And then, I'll do other things. I'll certainly look at the stool for, dysbiosis and leaky gut. But I'm mostly a cortisol and high sensitivity CRP guy.
Okay. And when you start patients with probiotics, do you generally tell them that, look, this is something that you're going to need to take for life every day? And then the corollary question is, what happens when someone who's been on probiotics for a while stops? In other words, like, we know that if someone stops their SSRI cold or any of their other psych meds, there's probably going to be like a serious whack out effect in one way or another. Does that happen with probiotics as well? We
don't have that data, right? And basically I ask people to buy into a philosophy. I share my philosophy with them. I tell them what I'm trying to do. And yeah, I mean, a probiotic for me is like, well, now that you're feeling better, why don't you just stop eating? Why don't you just stop sleeping 8 hours? Why don't you just stop walking, outside in the sun? Why don't you just stop hanging out with friends? Right? These aren't medications, I don't believe. These are lifestyle modifications, and these are foods. and things we used to get without having to take external supplementation. We just can't get that these days. So I don't necessarily see these things as a medication, which I try to get people off of, right? And if I try to use these natural approaches, these lifestyle modification, this sealing and healing of a leaky gut, the right sizing of inflammation, the resuscitation of tired adrenals, the balancing of neurotransmitters and hormones, blah, 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 to get people on less medications, get them all the way off medications, to respond better to medications, have fewer side effects with medications. So no, I don't, most of my lifestyle modification recommendations I feel should be sustained for in perpetuity. There's a word for you, Eric. Perpetuity. Fun to say, perpetuity.
Yeah, I like that word. That's a good word.
Now, what's going to happen when you stop them? I don't know. My fear would not necessarily be a withdrawal as much as, well, whatever it is we were trying to accomplish, whatever it is we were treating will come back.
Yeah, I guess that's what I'm asking. Is there kind of a rebound effect where they were fine while they're on the probiotic, they say, oh, I'm doing great, I'll stop, or, this is starting to get kind of expensive, and then they stop it for a month and suddenly they're back in the soup.
Rebound implies to me withdrawal, physiologic dependence and withdrawal. Maybe that's just my own interpretation of it. So no, I do not expect that. I just would expect that slowly over time. And this is the trick, because, I'm doing all this stuff and I'm really feeling good, but I don't know. And then you stop it for a couple of days or even a week and nothing happens. And then only after time do you see all of this coming back, because that's when I think all of that metaflammation returns. We've finally gotten that under control, and we've finally been able to plug the drain so that you're not losing all your hormones, you're not losing all your neurotransmitters down this open drain, and we're helping you rebuild and replenish. And now you stop doing all those things, and then that state of dilapidation and depletion and imbalance returns, and then your symptoms will. In terms of an acute rebound phenomenon, I'm not familiar with such, and neither would I necessarily expect that from these mechanisms.
Do you generally start a patient, like if a patient comes in and she or he is already on an SSRI, maybe a couple of other drugs, do you start the probiotics while they're taking the meds and step them down off the meds, or do you get them off the meds first?
Oh no, I will combine. It's why I call myself an integrative psychiatrist, meaning I integrate the two, and that's really, I think, where I have my best success. Right? I'm never going to vilify mainstream shrinkology. I wouldn't, like I said, go to battle with some of these. You get somebody who's convinced they're the love child spawned from the union of Walt Disney and Anastasia. That's more than a probiotic patient, Eric. They're going to need a big gun, right? Now, at the same time, I'm going to treat the person and the substrate underneath the illness, okay? So I'm going to do both. If you come to me on, a medication, depends on why I want to mess with you, right? So if you're on medications, is it because, do we want to mess with that because certain symptoms aren't better, or because you're having certain side effects? Both of those things. So I'm going to customize it right out of the gate in terms of what I do, but it is not unusual for me to overlap, the mainstream things with, and there's data, right? So what are the most common things to do for someone who's been on an antidepressant and it's not responding adequately? Well, there's data support for the addition of fish oil, D3, L-methylfolate, SAMe, and probiotics, right? Not only add all of those, it just depends. But chances are, if they're showing signs of inflammation, what does that look like to a psychiatrist? Fatigue, lethargy, brain fog, no joy in Mudville. That's inflammation, right? They're already overweight. That is going to be someone who, whether I mess with their meds or not, initially is going to get fish oil, D3, probiotic, probably L-methylfolate from me.
Are there any insurers, whether federal or private sector, that are covering probiotics or any of these other supplements that you mentioned in this context?
None that I know of, and I'm mixed about that. I don't know if I want them involved in that, to tell you the truth.
I hear you. I hear you.
Yeah, it's just, I don't know. I've seen what happens to prescribing of medications predicated upon cost and access, and I think that's sometimes not a good thing. right? So I don't want them involved in my fish oil and my D3 and my probiotics. But at the same time, it does, I have a very myopic view. I'm just a clinician trying to help that one person. From a business perspective, I don't know that I'm smart enough to answer that question.
Yeah, I'm just curious about it because it does sometimes, in general, one of the challenges with functional, holistic, integrative medicine is access. You know, a lot of people simply can't afford the out-of-pockets on.
Correct. Yeah, no, that's right. And that's like a lot of people can't afford to go to Whole Foods. A lot of people have to go to McDonald's. Nothing against McDonald's. I don't work for Whole Foods. All right. But, it costs more money, unfortunately. And that's a tragic thing. And I don't know if that's a social thing or an economic thing or a little bit of both. But good food costs a lot. Healthy food, healthy lifestyle takes more time and money, right? When you're working constantly to just basically keep a roof over your head and your kids fed, you don't have time to go to the gym. You don't have time to go out and walk. You don't have the money to get good food. You don't have the money for this stuff. That's a great question. No more of those. That's for bigger brains than mine, I'm afraid.
You and me alike. Okay, in the interest of getting our 8 hours of sleep, 9:30. So I guess, if anybody has one last quick, shooting from the hip, burning question, ask now or forever, hold your peace. Let's see. Well, it seems we've covered the waterfront. So,
or we've done our job and put them to sleep. See, I'm very therapeutic. Right. Exactly.
The people are still hanging in there, judging from the log here. Okay, wait, Deborah has a question.
Deborah, you already asked your question, I thought.
Well,
go ahead. You can have a second question.
Oh, there's a question here about natural probiotics and raw probiotics.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about, I guess we're talking about fermented foods and all that. Does that figure into your?
I like fermented foods. I would not use them instead of a probiotic, however, and that had to do with that slide I showed towards the end that had kind of those rows of things I look for, and most foods just haven't, they either don't have the same specifications or haven't really been studied in that fashion. That said, I do think you get some, I love fermented foods, and I eat as many as I can, and I still take probiotics. Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Last question here. Diane's asking, do you suspect MTHFR gene mutations when there's inflammation and a high vitamin B22? What does that mean? Is that supposed to be B12, or is there a vitamin B22 that I don't even know about?
By 220, 230, whatever it takes. That's from Mr. Mom. No one's old enough to remember that movie. When I see inflammation, I do almost automatically expect at least a temporary, right, decrease in the ability to convert folic acid or folate into methylene tetrahydrofolate. Okay, so I usually, and I think that's one of the reasons, that's one of our most commonly added supplements to an antidepressant, for example. You remember that was Deplin's original, I think, indication, and maybe that's its only one, is adjunctively, and that's L-methylfolate. And that, the number needed to treat for Deplin was so favorable. I mean, it's crazy, 1 in 8. You can't find a medication that has that kind of number needed to treat. Usually it's 7, 8, 10 even. But the number needed to treat, that's how many people you'd have to treat with Deplin or with placebo to show, anyhow, was 1 in 4 in the inflamed patient, and that was measured with high sensitivity CRP. So yes, that's kind of the fix for L-methylfolate for that genetic mutation, and I almost automatically assume that, and I don't always measure that SNP. I just go ahead and empirically treat. Mm-hmm.
And what about prebiotics? Do you do anything special for prebiotics? Do those, like the vegetables that are rich in those prebiotic fibers, do those need to be eaten raw? What's your take on prebiotics?
I think probably better raw. You can get some compounds that incorporate those prebiotics. Prebiotics are those kinds of, again, non-digestible, usually non-digestible starches that you don't have the enzymatic machinery to digest, but your beneficial health bugs love these things. And so we like to feed your good bugs. And I think those are often those fructo and oligo, saccharides, disaccharides. Red wine is a good prebiotic, Eric. As we're winding down, that might be a good thing for you to consider.
I need all the red civilizations I can get.
But I think for those of us that have now raw is not always better. I don't know how you always determine this. Some people don't have the enzymatic machinery to do as well with raw. Okay, but normally I like raw for most people. Yeah.
Great. All right, I think that does it for tonight. Thank you, Dr. David Scheider. That was a great talk and really interesting information. And thanks again to Omni-Biotic for sponsoring this. Again, if you'd like to get samples of their products, go to omnibioticlife.com. That's OMNIBIOTICLIFE.com/samples. And you can get samples there. And with that, I'll sign off. My name is Eric Goldman. This is Holistic Primary Care. Send you warm wishes from New York City, and stay tuned for more great webinars coming up in the next couple of weeks. Be well, everybody. Take care.
Thanks, Eric. Okay, man.
Bye-bye.
Everybody's asleep. Okay. Hold on. Well, okay, what time are you getting me up? Because I got an 8 o'clock program. You're leaving at 7:40. Get the place cleaned up. Don't bite me.